what are the two things on exchange here, right? One side wants the healthcare spending, and the other side wants to what nets out provide lower agency subsidized long-term 15 and 30-year mortgages, right? So if you're thinking about what's going to win over with the electorate, say like, all right, what do you want? Affordable housing, or get your home ownership rates up for the younger end of the American workforce, who the statistics show are kind of underpacing where prior generations have been at in terms of owning their home out, or owning a home with a mortgage, relative to boomer generation, Gen X, and even the early millennials. You see this in the data. Late millennials, Gen Z, they are very behind on owning home ownership, and that's largely because of government policy. What's going on with the Fannie Mae situation, and the very clear agenda from this White House to successfully exit Fannie Mae from conservatorship and IPO, and raise capital publicly to lower the borrowing rates available to American homebuyers on 15 and 30-year mortgages. It comes down to who is the public going to side with here? What do they want? The ACA results they've been getting, and that's kind of a known commodity at this point. What's happening with healthcare costs? It hasn't actually delivered kind of the objectives it declared it was going to, or intended to, upon onset. Healthier population for one, lower healthcare costs, more coverage. It's gotten more coverage, but I'd say those other two objectives we're missing pretty significantly on. Healthcare costs are rising, insurance costs, very clearly going up. And then in terms of just overall population level health, I'll leave this for the public health advocates to decide. But what I see in America is the same problem, those core trends: obesity, diabetes, heart disease. We've done nothing to reverse those. So our population health really made a dent in those really important problems, which is largely all of the costs on the government sponsored health insurance, Medicare, Medicaid. It's really materializing into the public debt problem that the entire society is having to deal with. So you have that on one side, status quo, maintain ACA, or do you try to flip what's going on in the housing market since 2008 and these underlying structures that have been a headwind to the youngest demographic in America having access to that same agency subsidized, or government subsidized, public subsidized mortgage rates for longer term borrowing? If you ask me, I think if you look at the electorate, you think, which side is this going to go? It may break upon age lines most heavily, and then maybe income, and wealth buckets as well. But if you're thinking for the younger demographic, and we saw this in the 2024 election results last November, we saw a shift. Like, there was a swing towards the youth tilting instead of liberal, which has always been the case in the whole post-World War II environment, starting to turn towards the Republican Party. So if you ask me to make a prediction with the youth, what do they want? Well, by definition, they tend to be the healthiest segment of the population. Future healthcare needs, that's down the road. That you're not thinking about, what your life is going to look like in your 40s or 50s when you're in your 20s, or maybe early 30s even. And at that point, your focus really is that house. So as this gets communicated, you're slowly going to see that that result and support for which side of the aisle or White House versus the legacy Democrat leadership, who they decide to support in this fight. I think it breaks towards the Republicans is how I would handicap this. So
So
Cameron, any comments? We can shift over and then come back
I
to
was going to ask
that.
you kind of, this is an opinion question, so take that with a grain of salt. But why did the Republicans throw out kind of this riff idea, right? So obviously there's a lot going on, but it seems like Republicans have, for the most part, the votes. They need a few more to come their way, but
Hmm.
throwing out there, hey, if we don't get exactly what we want, we're actually going to just automatically fire everything at furloughed. That is definitely throwing out something that I think has not been done in past exercises like this, but obviously is meant to be part of the bargaining chip. So why push so heavily in that direction for the Republican side rather than maybe trying to do the backdoor deal, shake some hands, find the compromise pieces behind the scenes? Why go so publicly out there saying that's where we're gonna go if we don't get the O triple BA items in place?
Yeah, it's a negotiation chip, in my opinion. So if you're representing the White House in these negotiations, um, from your political faction, there is actually, as we talked about, like you've seen this shift, like from the working class. It starts off with Lincoln's Republican base, free labor movement, all of that. Republican Party shifted over the course of the 20th century towards being like the party of the wealthy or the party of the business owner. I think there's still some truth to that. There's still that person is still inside or that faction is still inside the big tent. But especially post 2008, but early 2010s as the Tea Party movement was getting started, it shifted back towards that roots of Lincoln's party of labor and production, and you're seeing that in the polling and the results. So, but you've also got this element of the Republican Party, however, where it's still got that DNA of conservatism, where it's maybe not so much in the era of the 1980s, 90s, 2000s, where Reagan, Bush were in control, and it was a neocon dominated establishment, a party of big government, and it lost those conservative roots, right? Then it was more just throwing out some carrots here and there to keep that voting base inside the big tent. Well, now that conservative like base is actually in control. So I would argue that chip to the Republicans of a smaller government, a smaller bureaucratic workforce, doesn't impact the Trump voter base to any degree, right? It's actually more likely that federal government you know department of whatever worker is actually more in line with the Democrats' political base. So in reality here, the of putting your feet down um, and putting your own pawns on the front line here, they may lose their jobs out of this. From a strategic move, that seems like a hasty move that you would only do out of necessity, out of weakness. So that's just my opinion as I'm trying to create my own mental model of these negotiations going on and understand uh, how the economics play out. But I think, yeah, the main point of what you asked, it's the conservative DNA that's kind of reestablishing itself in the base that is ultimately supporting the Trump White House, and that's where the Trump White House derives its political power.
Because I think I was surprised from my side to see that be almost one of the first things they said in response, right? So definitely a little bit of a different approach than we're used to seeing.
Yep.
So before I push us forward to the next piece here, we've talked a lot about mortgages and trying to find ways to get people into homes. What specifically, maybe help me tie the dots together on how all of this that's going on is going to directly then somehow result in, if Republicans get their way, lower mortgage rates.
Yep. So the key thing here to score the ACA, and the healthcare spending as right. And we every time one of these spending bills is proposed, like CBO has to rubber stamp it so that the economics don't add to the projected debt blowout that's taking place over and above the baseline that already exists, which is already assuming more debt, right? It's a process that doesn't work at all. Obviously, the debt's at 36, 37 trillion. It just keeps ballooning. But that's the parliamentary procedure.